This is Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman.
This is George Newbern, the voice of Superman.
And you're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam.
Streaming at DCAUreview.com and on your favorite podcast app.
Faster than a speeding bullet. More powerful than a locomotive. You know the rest.
Red, blue, yellow, primary, but it works in a superhero-ish kind of way.
The future of Metropolis is in the hands of the Man of Steel, Superman.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 310 of the DCAU Review. I am Liam, and with me, as he always is Cal. Cal, we are smack dab in the middle of celebrating the 86th birthday of the Man of Steel. Happened late last month, and as we have been talking in the last few episodes, we're running a little bit low on Superman the Animated Series episodes that we have not talked about before. But thankfully, there's a few very early on in our catalog that we kind of we did like a speed run review of. And here today we have another very important episode of not only Superman the Animated Series, but one could argue for the DCAU as a whole to give a proper deep dive, quote unquote, re-review, as we've dubbed them here today.
That's right, Liam. We're excited, and we aren't alone either. As we've done, we've brought in a fresh pair of eyes, a fresh opinion on what this episode entails, and giving their thoughts. So we're excited to introduce our guest here in just a little bit. We'll bring him on. It's going to be Nathan from Superman the Animated Podcast. We've had him on. We had him on a long time ago, as we discovered in our sit down with him discussing the episode. But excited to chat about all of that with you. And we'll get to that and introduce our special guest correspondent for the episode in just a moment, Liam. But before we do, we'll, of course, get the official IMDb synopsis for this episode, which originally aired here in the States on the Kids WB back on November the 2nd, 1996, meaning we're coming up here in just a few months on the 28th year anniversary of this episode's debut.
That's right. And before we get to our chat with Nathan, we'll be breaking down all four of our regular categories, and Nathan will be giving his score. So there will be some first run scores given on this episode from Nathan. And of course, Cal and I will be revisiting our scores from back when we reviewed this originally and seeing if we agree with our past selves or not. But before we get there, I must, of course, hit us with the official IMDb synopsis for this week's episode, Stolen Memories. Of course, the official IMDb synopsis reading is brought to you by the Pod Tower YouTube channel. You can head to youtube.com/the Pod Tower. There you will find all of our episodes at the DCAU Review, including bonus episodes and other things. We just put up another bonus episode recently talking the official announcement of the Batman Caped Crusader animated show coming to Prime Video this summer.
People love those bonus episodes. They're
absolutely
our top listens on YouTube go to the bonus episodes discussing Batman Caped Crusader. So perhaps that's why you're here and checking out this episode.
Absolutely. And yeah, if this is your first regular review, we do appreciate you joining us. This is a good one. And yes, you can head to youtube.com/the Pod Tower. You can hear every single review and bonus episode we've ever done. It's all there on the channel. And not only us, but you'll also get content from the Watchtower database. They have two series right now. Their main flagship show, Jump on the Bat-Wagon, where they are also reviewing all of the episodes of the DCAU, but in air date order, so a little bit different than how we do things here. There's also the archives of Tim Talk, and there's also their new interview series, Intergang, that the Watchtower boys are doing, where they have some more long-form interviews. So lots of great content up there on youtube.com/the Pod Tower. And without further ado, this is the synopsis for Stolen Memories, which was written by Rich Fogel, directed by Kurt Gaeta, with music by Michael McCuistion and animation by Coco and Dong Yang. And that synopsis reads as such. Brainiac, once Krypton's all-knowing planetary computer, comes to Earth as part of his information gathering trek across the galaxy. But as Superman discovers, Brainiac's intent after gathering the world's knowledge is to destroy the Earth.
Boy, if that felt like a one long run-on sentence, by the way. I don't know.
Yes. I think it's 2 sentences, but it is about a paragraph long. So not exactly, didn't exactly keep it short and pithy. As
Work on your structure, IMDb.
Nothing wrong with the information relayed, but you could feels like you were trying to fill out a word count.
A comma, perhaps, or less commas, more periods, please.
Yes, perhaps.
You're writing.
But yes, that is a pretty good synopsis. I guess as far as explaining what the episode is. And so I think, without any further ado, let's throw it to ourselves in the past, to ourselves and our special correspondent, Nathan from Superman the Animated Podcast, as we discuss the episode Stolen Memories.
Coming from the land down under.
Thanks, us from the future. Yes, here we are. We're so excited to be joined once again. First time in, I didn't know this until we were just about to go on the years, that it had been this long. But it's been a couple of years, but we finally get to have Nathan MacKenzie from Superman the Animated Podcast back to join us to talk about this episode, Stolen Memories. What an exciting time to have you back on. And Nathan, you actually just relaunched your own podcast. Is that correct?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Yes, definitely. Back on the air, so to speak. Been on hiatus for the last couple of years, and like you said, I can't believe it's been that long since we spoke. It's great to have Superman in animation back. You know, My Adventures with Superman season 1 was last year. Finally starting to talk about that, and season 2 is coming out soon. Hopefully, it's going to be here earlier in Australia, but you know,
fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. But yeah, it's so great when I got your message to come on back on your podcast. And I'm excited to talk about this episode. It's been a while since I've seen this one, and it's good to talk about it back from season 1 of Superman the Animated Series. So yeah, I'm excited.
Absolutely, yeah. It was fun looking at this. Cal and I were talking about this early on in our show. Our episodes were a lot shorter, as longtime listeners will know. Yeah. But also, we burned through so many of these Superman episodes. We would do like double episodes. We reviewed this originally with Ghost in the Machine, which is insane to think about, to do both of those at once and talk about them for like 10 minutes each.
I would say that the total runtime of the episode, talking about 2 different Superman the Animated Series episodes that are pretty pivotal to even the entire DCAU arc, whereas a total of like 40 minutes. So I don't know what we talked about, how we could have gotten in any sort of detail. So that's what we're doing with you today. We're excited to kind of get into the weeds.
Actually, give this more of a proper deep dive that it deserves. Obviously, this version of Brainiac that they bring in a little bit different than the ones we've seen in the past. Where does this Brainiac rank for you, Nathan, as far as like interpretation? This one, he's all robot. He's not a green alien man. He doesn't have a little monkey that he talks to like in some of the comics or the Super Friends or anything like that. But also the direct connection of him being from Krypton, being this AI that kind of causes the ultimate downfall of the planet.
I was pretty lucky in some respects. So I didn't read a lot of comic books when I was younger, so I didn't know too many interpretations of Brainiac as a whole. So, but now, obviously, getting older and reading comic books and watching other animated versions of him as well, I reckon this is by far one of my favorites. I love the storyline, the fact he comes from Krypton. I think it's perfect. I almost think it needs to happen in the James Gunn movies. I think it's a perfect way to bring this character into the series. The fact that he's from Krypton, he was this almost essential computer for it, and his affiliation with Jor-El, I reckon, was perfect. How he basically, a computer was telling Jor-El that you're wrong, even though the computer obviously knows Krypton's been destroyed. But just the idea of it, I think, was a great idea by Bruce Timm, and it's the fact that and it just that. The character itself throughout the whole series of Superman the Animated Series, but also leading into Justice League and Justice League Unlimited. It's just, I thought it was brilliant. And I think this is probably one of the best tellings of Brainiac of all time.
Agreed. Yeah. I feel like, to your point, by making him like Jor-El's creation that essentially turns on him and deems him no longer useful, Brainiac to Jor-El, thus ending Jor-El's life, ending Krypton when he could have saved it, makes it a much more personal vendetta, and a much more personal when, especially in this episode, as we'll talk about in a few minutes, but when Superman has to come to grips with the fact that this computer program is actually evil. Like it is inherently evil and is responsible for the fact that Superman was never able to actually have this relationship with his own birth father because of the evil nature of this. So it kind of puts a little bit of extra oomph at the end, especially in this episode. And then, as we know, as you said, throughout the entire arc of the DCAU, where it's not just some random person that tries to come and, pick on Superman or like some of the other characters. It's a little bit more personal because of the connection that he has here. So almost avenging his father's death in a way that's similar to, you would see with Batman or, some of the other characters that have that same tragic story. So I agree with you. I think I would hope that James Gunn has taken some notes here and will hopefully apply it to the upcoming live action films if Brainiac's going to be involved.
Yeah, absolutely. So from there, we'll jump right into plot here. We kick things off. It's a dark and stormy evening in the Metropolis desert. Where are we here? Like.
The geography of Metropolis is always very strange. We talk about this. It's the same thing with Gotham. Like you have this dense, city with tall buildings and a metropolis, if you will, and then all of a sudden there's just desert wasteland on the outskirts someplace. Like you're in you're out on the open plains or something like that. I don't know. It must be close by though, because Lex Luthor doesn't have to travel far in order to be there.
They're within driving distance of town, I guess. But yes, Lois and Jimmy have stowed away upon this giant LexCorp convoy, and they are going here. They know something big's going down. They don't know quite what it is, but suddenly this giant spaceship descends from the heavens, and Lex is there to meet Brainiac. We see a sort of projection hologram version of him coming down. Lex offers him a CD with all of the information in human history on it, or a basic knowledge of Earth and human history on it. And this pleases Brainiac enough that he and Lex, not for the last time, are seemingly going to be business partners here. Do you like the inclusion of Lex here being sort of like the immediate guy trying to capitalize? He's like, I want to get my own space alien now that I have to deal with Superman.
I think it had to be Lex, to be honest. I don't think it could have been anybody else. And I do love the fact that, as we'll see later on, that Lex has basically said, well, it was my satellites that picked us up. This was me. And then obviously another way for him to make a quick buck as well.
So, Mr. Luthor, how long did you intend to keep your rendezvous a secret? In case you haven't heard, there's a thing known as national security.
There's also a thing known as free enterprise. It was LexCorp that scanned the heavens, it was LexCorp that made contact, and it will be LexCorp that reaps the benefits.
At what cost? What do we know about this alien?
Brainiac is a collector of data. In exchange for information about us, he is willing to share his vast knowledge of the universe. Allow me to demonstrate.
Hey, what is this?
This is just a sample of his technology. Who knows what else he has? A cure for cancer? A way to repair the ozone? Are you going to turn your backs on that?
Get me down from here! Luthor!
Perhaps if we could meet this Brainiac face to face.
That could prove difficult. However, I have a suggestion. Let Superman talk with him. Alien to alien. Then he can confirm what I'm telling you.
Lex is. I did love the introduction, though. It had a bit of Close Encounters of the Third Kind vibe. But you spoke about where are we in Metropolis? Like I think a couple of episodes after this one, there's Promethean, and
yes,
you see him, and you just see him in the middle of the desert. Then all of a sudden, there's a city in there. Like it's almost like Las Vegas.
I guess it is.
On.
Yeah, just
but yeah, I think Lex had to be the one that actually found him.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you go back to obviously a totally different animated it's a movie, obviously, when they brought out Doomsday.
Mm-hmm.
Very similar. Lex found Doomsday,
Mm-hmm.
in that movie. So yeah, I think it had to be Lex in this series, and I thought it was well played, to be honest.
Well, it pays off. It pays off, right? Because this thread starts here and ends in Justice League Unlimited, so they paid it off.
That's right.
No, exactly, and it was good to see that there was and I love continuity as well. I love the fact that this is the stepping stone for Brainiac, and we obviously see where it plays out later on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's sort of something you can do with this like AI artificial being that you can do where, again, as we'll see, you can blow him up 100 times, but there's always a way for him to come back in a way that doesn't feel cheap or like you're cheating and bringing somebody back from the dead. So
speaking of AI, I love the way when he's in front of the United or the defense United States defense ministers there, kind of talking to them and explaining why which is what we see in the next scene after this. Lois and Jimmy get the footage of him ascending in this super hover chair into the actual
space lazy boy.
The space lazy boy. Good. Yeah, he's ascending into the actual ship. We get a photo on the front page of the Daily Planet, and so Luthor is sent to the Pentagon to explain his actions and why he wasn't open about this happening and sharing this information with them. And the way that he explains it, after he says it, I was like, oh, Brainiac is Google. He's like, Brainiac is a collector of data, and in exchange for information about us, he's willing to share his vast knowledge of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
So he's Meta, he's Facebook.
I was going to say, there's a lot of modern tech company implications to the Brainiac being
a
data miner.
Everything he knows, all the knowledge you could possibly want. You just have to give him a little bit of information about yourself. That's all.
Right. At what cost? But yes, Cal, as you mentioned, Lex goes before the Pentagon and Superman's there as well. And they discuss things as you mentioned, Nathan. It's all about, this is like government, national security versus private industry in this in this superhero cartoon on Saturday mornings for kids. Theoretically, I love this bit of Lex kind of flexing his corporate muscles and talking about how it's my satellite, my data, my my research that led us to this, so I get to do whatever I want with it, basically. And so Superman decides, after hearing from Lex that Brainiac very much wants to meet him, Superman heads out to the Metropolis desert, and after a little bit of hide and seek, finds the ship and enters inside. And this is one of those bits where I feel like they were like, well, we can't only have one fight in the episode, so we're like, let's just have some random drone robots attack Superman for a minute. But he does get attacked by Brainiac's.
He at least tries to explain it away as testing him to see his strength.
Right. We do get that reveal, and then but
you're right.
As Brainiac, that's one of those things. Where it's like the real world reason is because we needed Superman to punch something.
Right. He uses the one of the arms of the robots. I was excited to talk to Nathan. I was like, He uses it like a cricket bat. He takes it and he starts whacking the guy. Like, I can use the term cricket bat in this podcast, and someone will appreciate it.
And that I do. I still play indoor cricket, actually.
Didn't even know that. You see?
Serendipity there.
There we go.
But yes, here's where we get kind of Brainiac's perceived mission statement to Superman. And
most impressive. Your powers even exceed Luthor's description.
Brainiac, I presume.
I apologize for any discomfort, but it was important that I accurately gauge your powers.
Why? Morbid curiosity?
Curiosity, yes. Morbid, hardly. You see, we have more in common than you can possibly know, Kal-El.
How do you know my name? Have you been to Krypton?
I am Krypton. We are both orphans of the same planet. While you've been living here on Earth, I have roamed the universe. These orbs contain all the knowledge I've collected. Each represents all the recorded information from a single planet.
Incredible. And Krypton?
All that was Krypton is contained within this orb.
Kind of, I guess this is his Empire Strikes Back pitch, Darth Vader pitching to Luke Skywalker here as he explains that he collects knowledge. We see all of these golden orbs, and as you touch them, you can see all of the knowledge that Brainiac's collected on the planet, and Brainiac actually offers the orb that represents Krypton to Superman, and he sees images of the planet in sort of its heyday, and even sees an image of Jor-El working on the spaceship, but Brainiac's pretty quick to cut it off right then and there before he sees anything else that might have happened on Krypton.
Nothing to see here.
So he severs that connection. But I like this, and I again, curious your thoughts. We already talked about different versions, but again, the comic version of Brainiac, he kind of does this, but instead of an orb collecting the info, he takes a city and shrinks it down, and he has a bunch of little mini cities on his ship around the world. And I think this is one, it's more heinous, right? Because he's killing everyone on these planets.
Yeah.
And also I think it tracks of what he's trying to do. He's not making a terrarium.
Right.
He only values data. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that's, and so once he's collected, and as he later states, once the data has been collected, the only thing left to do is to make that data more valuable by extinguishing everyone else who would have access to this knowledge or data. So I think I like the idea of the orbs kind of representing that same thing of the mini bottle cities, but maybe doing it again, maybe in a different and more interesting way.
Yeah, I totally agree. I like this version, like I said before, and the fact that it is basically a computer, so it makes more sense. This basically all these orbs are all the USBs and that he's collected the data from these planets and stuff. Just going back a little bit, I love the part when when we see Superman in the first part of this episode where he's still flying his spaceship, that he come to Earth in. I thought that was pretty cool. The fact that they found a way for him to actually fly in the spacecraft that brought him to Earth. I thought that's still cool. That's something you don't see you'll never see in live action or anything like that.
True. I mean, a lot of them don't even put him in a spacesuit. So you also got the white, the white and red spacesuit, which I definitely had that. We definitely had that action figure from growing up. But even if there's some cynical stuff, it's funny. There's a audio commentary track for this on the DVDs and Blu-rays with Bruce Timm and Alan Burnett and some of the other people who worked on the episode. And you can definitely tell they mentioned Brainiac's little rocket sled that he's in was a toy company design that they were asked to incorporate. And I'm sure the spacesuit was as well. But honestly, I always look at it as no, it's cool. First of all, this version of Superman maybe can't hold his breath for 1,000 hours or whatever the comic explanation for why he can just fly in space is. So I love that he's in a spaceship and also that it can travel. They talk about how he traveled light years away and is sort of researching. And to your point, Nathan, it kind of juxtaposes then this offer that Brainiac makes him, which is that he wants to explore beyond. He doesn't want to just necessarily sit on Earth. He wants to explore the wider galaxy. And here's Brainiac saying, hey, you can come with me, basically. And he doesn't, he leaves out the part where he's going to blow up the Earth, but basically making the pitch makes the pitch to him of, you're too important, you're too special to waste your life sitting on this one planet when there's so much more to explore and learn. Don't you want to come, and he calls them the twin sons of Krypton, really appealing that, and of course lying to him and telling him that, Jor-El helped Brainiac escape Krypton, and that he sort of presents himself as this benevolent figure and ally of Jor-El's. So you do feel like when he makes that offer, it's okay, well, we saw earlier that he is interested in kind of exploring the deeper reaches of space. He has that curiosity and that yearning to learn more about where he came from and what else is out there. And he kind of has to ruminate on that, and he heads to his very swanky apartment. I don't know how he's affording that penthouse on a reporter's salary, but that was the 90s. I guess housing was cheaper then. But But yes, he heads to bed after a news report where we hear that everybody is just going crazy. The whole town has Brainiac fever, as Angela Chen tells us. And as Superman begins to ruminate over that, he heads to sleep. And at which point we get this really kind of trippy dream sequence, which I'm sure we'll talk more about in visuals, but where he begins to understand or discover a little bit more of the data or knowledge that he received when he touched Brainiac's orb. And we see these brief glimpses of his mother holding him as a baby, the destruction of the planet, and ultimately we see him see Jor-El making this appeal to the Kryptonian Council that Brainiac is lying to them and that he's trying to save himself and he doesn't want to spend time trying to save the rest of the planet because that's time he can't be spending trying to save himself. And that ultimately Jor-El and Brainiac were at odds at the end. And this moment of Superman sort of darting awake in his apartment, suddenly realizing, oh wait, there's more to this than meets the eye here.
That's right. And that's I don't know, Nathan, do you have any thoughts about any of those sequences? Obviously, we talk more when we get into the visuals itself, but this kind of after effect that kind of happens hours later after touching this orb coming through the dream sequence, I thought it was a little bit silly. Like I didn't even remember that being the plot point. Yeah. Like he touches the orb and then he falls asleep in dreams, and that's how the information sort of downloads into his brain that way. I think it's a little bit of fancy writing there. How do we get him to kind of figure out that Brainiac is the bad guy, or that he's not really offering him, or to start to distrust him? He has this dream that supposedly is an after effect of the orb. Any thoughts on using that as the way for him to kind of begin to distrust Brainiac?
My thought process was very similar. Is okay, so is this a dream sequence? Is this has he gone back in time?
Right.
Like if you go back to the first couple episodes of the series, he's got that I can't remember what it is.
The box.
He touched the box, yeah. Like if he would have gone back and and touched that and actually had visions of maybe the two connected, like the orb and this connected, like and all that sort of stuff, and he had that waking up from the truth. And so the fact that he woke up and went straight to Lex to say, look, I've got reservations about Brainiac, and then obviously Lex, I have reservations about everybody. But,
How much longer?
We should be online in 20 minutes, Mr. Luthor.
Make it 10.
Luthor, we have to talk. I have reservations about Brainiac.
Really? Well, you're a little late. I'm already preparing a hookup with Brainiac's ship so he can feed his memory directly into LexCorp's mainframe.
I wouldn't.
I'm listening.
It was several hours after I touched the orb that I saw the images. It's too soon to trust him completely.
I never trust anyone completely. Since Brainiac arrived, I've had him targeted from land-based platforms with a payload of 6.5 megatons. Enough firepower to incinerate Metropolis County.
Keep your friends close, but your enemies closer.
Precisely. Although in your case, I'll make an exception.
Just the fact that, how could he see that was truthful? Like it was just a dream.
Right, it was a dream, right? Yeah.
I think what you said. I think they've just written it in. Think, we have to try to explain how Superman doesn't trust Brainiac, and how do we do that? So they've tried to do that in a dream sequence, which I think it's a cheating way of doing it. But
a little bit.
It is what it is.
I almost wish, I don't know, maybe I don't know how you would have Clark Kent do some investigative work, but just something else, or maybe Lois and Jimmy kind of factor back into it as like doing some reporter investigative work. I don't know. They're in that first scene, and then not really used again. So it does feel like a cheat. Like, hey, he's just gonna get this information downloaded hours later. Or maybe he just has to sneak into the ship again to touch the orb, and he has this opportunity to speak with, the holographic. I don't know how they don't really quite explain how the orb works. Like if you can interact with the people, it seems, because Jor-El tries to interact with him initially there when he says Kal-El, but I don't know if this is how sentient the beings are in that orb world, but it does feel like a little bit of a cheat code. But as you mentioned, Nathan, he goes to Lex, immediately says, "Hey, I think Brainiac's untrustworthy," which it makes him seem a little bit foolish at this point, because it's like, well, he attacked you with an army of robots. The first thing you'd walked into his ship with, like, and he happens to have, all of this data from all of these other planets. Sure, you didn't know that they were all destroyed, but it leads him to believe, at least share with Luthor his reservations. As you mentioned, Nathan, Luthor says already he doesn't trust him at all. He's got a backup plan. He's got an entire armory of missiles aimed at Brainiac's ship, enough to destroy Metropolis County, he says. So if anything goes wrong, when Superman returns to give Brainiac his answer, he's gonna blow him off the face of the planet. So Superman does return to the ship at that point to speak to him. In the middle of their conversation is where this deal between Lex and Brainiac culminates, as Lex is going to allow Brainiac access to download information into his systems, kind of completing the deal here between the two of them. And in that moment, Superman sneaks away as Brainiac begins to supposedly upload the information. He sneaks away to the room with the orbs, initially attempting to reach out and touch what I assume is the Kryptonian orb one more time. But instead, he grabs one of the other orbs that floats close to him, and he sees a horrifying scene of destruction from some alien planet. Which immediately he's taken aback by. He touches another one, sees a similar situation happening with more alien races dying. Grabbing one final orb, he's overwhelmed with grief and sadness as the picture is coming together here as he realizes that Brainiac isn't just collecting data, he's collecting data and destroying and killing the people that he's collecting the data from. So he puts the two pieces of the puzzle together, heads back to see Brainiac, and this is where we really we'll talk about it in voice acting, Nathan, but you really get to see Superman's emotion come out at this point. He's angry, he's, I think, feeling a little bit hoodwinked by Brainiac, and he finally understands what Brainiac is, but at the same time, it pains him to realize that Brainiac is a murderer. He's killed these millions and millions of different colonies of alien races, and realizes that Krypton was another one of those that he allowed to die.
You destroyed those planets, didn't you? And every living soul on them.
Only their knowledge was important. It was what I was programmed to collect and protect.
But why kill?
The fewer beings who have the knowledge, the more precious it becomes.
You're insane.
So we get a little bit of a fight between the two of them. Meanwhile, back Lex realizes that, Lex's people realize that the information isn't being uploaded to LexCorp. In fact, Brainiac is downloading himself to LexCorp's systems. Lex panics, attempts to stop it by telling them to pull the plug, but there's no failsafe at this point. So Lex, I love this scene. He has to go sit in his chair sort of helplessly, and he just slumps in his chair, defeated, realizing he has no backup systems at this point. He can't launch the missiles to kill Brainiac, and he's there, just sort of there, left to your own devices. It's kind of like where, your I don't know, your computer just downloaded a virus or something like that, and you just realize, you're like, well, I can't do anything now. I just have to, it's out of my hands at this point. There's absolutely nothing I can do. I think in a way also he realizes that his last hope is for Superman to do something in there, and that may even be even more irritating for this Luthor character to have to rely on Superman. But Superman goes toe-to-toe with Brainiac, and in the midst of it is able to kind of disconnect him from the systems, initially beginning to overtake him. But Brainiac shoots this weird beam out of his hand that temporarily makes Superman...
Well, first he puts him in like the back stretcher
that's
thing.
right, yeah.
The tentacle handcuff things. We'll talk more about those in visuals, certainly. And then, Superman breaks out of those, tries to attack him, but yes, is it a red sunbeam? It's not really red, it's kind of yellowy, but it seems to affect him like
a red
sun or kryptonite would.
Got any theories on that one, Nathan?
No, I just think
it's up to your headcanon at this point. Would you think it as a Red Sun?
Yeah. Well, it's funny actually because I just watched, like I spoke about, going through My Adventures with Superman, and they had a different incarnation of the Red Sun sort of thing in that, and it's probably your only thought process of what that is, and the fact that Brainiac's thought about that as well. The fact that this is. But you would think he would know where Superman's powers come from,
right?
The fact that his powers come from the sun, and so definitely, it's probably something that he could have thought about. I do like the fact that because we all know Superman in this version is not as powerful as he is in the comic books, and and it also just shows the different levels of power that Superman does have. Like he's gone from I can defeat you to I'm going to destroy you, especially after he sees the orbs, and you can just see the look on his face. And when he gets angry, you don't mess with, you don't mess with,
right.
And you go to, you move forward to like Apocalypse Now, and when Turpin dies, spoiler alert, and he just destroys that tank. I still got, the feels when I watch that scene. So you definitely know the different levels of Superman when he needs to put it on, so to speak. And Brainiac was no match for him strength-wise. And he eventually overpowered him. But, obviously Brainiac was smarter in the end.
That's right. That's very true. Yeah. So as you mentioned, Nathan, Superman eventually gets the upper hand. Even as the beams are firing at him, he ends up pushing them back.
That's right.
Causing the ship or Brainiac to be defeated. This allows Luthor temporarily able to get his systems back online to fire his missiles at Brainiac's gigantic warship, which causes it to head down in the Metropolis desert, crashing, much to everybody's cheers and delight. Superman, of course, is able to escape. Grabbing the Kryptonian orb. I guess this is my other question. Like, yes, we know that Brainiac returns, but is all of the information from those planets gone now, or does it reside in Brainiac? Like, because Brainiac carries on.
It's a good question.
Thoughts on that, Nathan?
Well, yeah, actually, at the end when the ship's going down, he actually says to Superman, "The orbs."
Yeah.
So like obviously we know that he grabs the Krypton one, and as you spoke about earlier, with regards to, the bottle city of Kandor, like that's basically what he's done in this version. He's grabbed the bottle city of Kandor and put it in his Fortress of Solitude. But it's a mystery where the rest of the orbs are. Were they destroyed on the ship? They're an orb. They're not physical, I wouldn't think.
Right.
So,
like you see him kind of like popping as he grabs the
but were they
one.
were they like a physical manifestation of Brainiac's memory? Like they're a part of him? Like, because that's what it seems like. Because he asks him, like, what are these orbs? And he's like, oh, they're sort of a physical manifestation, like almost like a server. Right. But like, Brainiac goes on to exist after this episode. Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Right. 30-year-old cartoon, but he goes on to exist after this episode, and. But does it? I only ask because as an 8-year-old watching this show, I was always like, "Oh, it's so sad. Like the memories of all these planets are now gone. Like nobody knows that they exist now because Brainiac destroyed them." So, but then my thought is, well, maybe because Brainiac exists, they still exist within Brainiac, and they could still manifest in some sort of physical form.
Sure,
later on.
I want to say I think it's in the Justice League, the Dark Side Brainiac Twilight episode. Hawkgirl and John are flying through, and there's like TV screens with different alien worlds on it.
Yeah.
Because I think they that's like a little throwaway line of like foreshadowing, because he says, "Well, maybe there's something about Thanagar here," and she kind of blows him off. So
that's right.
So he must have some copies of it, but maybe there's not like this full. Maybe the orbs were like the full encyclopedia, and he just is like. Now what he's got left is just like from memory is
interesting.
Whatever
like
he had.
When you reformat your computer and like the data's still there, but you got to dig through it.
Exactly. Maybe there's something. We somehow missed out on the episode where it's just Brainiac reformatting his hard drive and copying files from one computer to the other. But yes, we got a little postscript here as they mention that the ship has been destroyed. But the tech working at LexCorp notes that there appears to be a strange bit of alien code left over inside the LexCorp systems, and if you not a secret, but you do see the Brainiac symbol in that code on the screen. So we know that we probably haven't seen the last of Brainiac. And then at the end here, I think we get what is the introduction in this show to the concept of the Fortress of Solitude, though it's not called that quite yet. As we see Superman arriving in the Arctic and placing the orb on this little ice pillar thing that he has set up there, and he notes that this little Arctic hideout that he's discovered has potential, and he thinks he'll be spending a little bit more time there going forward. And he flies back out of the Arctic and off into the sky, and that's kind of where we wrap up our plot here. So,
Nathan, I would love your thoughts too as a Superman fan. Like, Fortress of Solitude in this is very different than the classic, like, Christopher Reeve's version of the Fortress of Solitude that was created with the crystal thrown into the lake, and and other versions of it. What's your thoughts on this sort of it takes shape throughout the series? Obviously, he gets the intergalactic zoo later on in the Lobo. The Lobo episodes, and then obviously it plays a part even in the Batman Beyond episodes later on, involving Starro and all this stuff. So, what are your thoughts as far as the story and how this was introduced, and how this version of the Fortress of Solitude sort of takes shape versus maybe how it's done in other live action films or other sorts of media?
I think they try to think of a way of how they're going to introduce the Fortress into this series, and I think they thought we're not going to do what's done in the past, so they thought they'll do something similar. Obviously, Superman's seen his world, from the first couple of episodes. He's seen visions of what it looks like. He's probably thought, well, what represents that on Earth? And he's probably found, this patch, of ice, and it's just, it's obviously a cave of some description that he's found, because a lot of the times you'll see him fly through the water and goes underneath where this cave is underneath. I just like the fact that there's always animals there, like there's other seals or polar bears and stuff, which is pretty cool. But I don't think they use it enough throughout the series, which I would have liked.
That's
but you mentioned it perfectly before. In a couple of episodes from now, we do see the animals that he brings back from the ship after his confrontation with Lobo. I thought was pretty cool, which I still find funny to this day, that how are these animals and creatures going to be fed and all that sort of
maybe
stuff.
He also took like all the food that the Collector had on his ship. Maybe
he's got Star Labs working on some sort of like auto feeders or something like that to help him something. I don't know.
That's a good question.
I agree with you. I think some of you could have relied on it a little bit more. I mean, he does seem to be a little bit more sociable in this series than maybe a classic Superman, where he kind of has to retreat and kind of collect himself, and does feel like an alien in this world. And you don't get as much of that introspective Superman in this series. Not that that's an issue, but it's just, I think, how they wrote the character a little bit differently. He's interacting with Lois and Jimmy and Emil Hamilton and whoever else on the, Maggie and Dan and all those other characters. So it's not as much Superman solo screen time for him to sort of put things together. So maybe that was a tonal shift because of how much Batman hangs out in the Batcave. You wanted it to be sort of night and day. But I do like that with all the elements and how it kind of progresses throughout, that they very DCAU, where they took this classic element and they just kind of put it on its side a little bit, where they're like, we're not going to do it exactly how everything has come before it is done. Yeah. You're going to get the references. You're going to get it. Like this is exactly what this is, even downright to the name, where Emil Hamilton gives it, the Fortress of Solitude name later on. So, I do like that they, like you said, Nathan, if you get the nods to what they're going for, but it's not a straight up rubber stamp copy.
Yeah, even like you said, Nathan, just being that it's like an Arctic cave as opposed to being a magic crystal palace that he throws into the ground and grows. Like, I think that's kind of a fun little twist on that. But yeah, I guess we'll get towards our score here. So overall, Nathan, as the real first full introduction to this Brainiac character, obviously we saw him a little bit in Last Son of Krypton. How does this do? Do you think as like an introduction to Brainiac, as as he's going to be in his role as a recurring villain, and then just overall as a story, as a journey for Superman to go on. How does this episode rank for you?
It ranked pretty highly, as you mentioned. This is a pretty big stepping stone for Brainiac throughout not only this series but also the DCAU as a whole. I love the continuity. Like, you go back to the first episode where obviously he was destroyed, but then we just see him rock up on an alien spaceship. I'm just assuming this is the same one, or whether he's just added things to it. Which makes, and I'm sure we'll talk about during the animations speak with regards to it's not the skull ship, so that we're all remembering from the comic books and stuff like that. So the fact that they've just gone down their own strain, the storyline itself setting up who Brainiac is, Superman realizing that I'm not the last son of Krypton, which still makes me laugh to this day, because everyone's still alive from Krypton. But if I was to give it a score out of 10, I think the only down point is what you discussed before with regards to the dream sequence. It just didn't make sense. Like, they tried to put something in there with regards to how's Superman going to figure out that Brainiac is not what he said he's going to be. So I think that was probably the only downfall of this episode. But overall, I'll give it an 8.
All right.
I like it.
There you go. Well, not too far from either of our original scores, by the way. As we mentioned, we're not giving new scores for this, but we will talk about our original scores, which we both somehow, despite only maybe spending 10 to 15 minutes on this show, gave this a 7 out of 10 when we were discussing it. So we're right there with you. I would say I think what we talked about before, where the personification of this Brainiac being a vendetta for Superman, and realizing that he has an axe to grind with this character. It's not just some random alien. It's not just an android robot. It's not like, this is a character that is objectively evil and only any legitimate threat also, because it's, he appears to be destroyed at the end of this episode, but then returns because, as we learn later on down the road through Justice League Unlimited, that a single piece of Brainiac surviving means that he can reconstitute himself in any form or fashion. So, laying him down as not only a huge threat to Superman, reoccurring sort of the Galactus to his Fantastic Four, if you will, where he's going to try and over again, he's a threat. He's trying to collect the data. He's trying to destroy the world. This is his programming, and you can't stop him. And how Superman is going to do that each and every time. But then ultimately, him being a threat to the rest of the DCAU as this universe continued to expand. I think it's a great intro. I probably wouldn't haggle over a point or two, as we talked about a couple weeks ago on our re-review, but I think an 8 would be fine. I would probably stick with my 7 just for old time's sake.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I think you both kind of touched on it already. Like, this has so much heavy lifting to do as far as establishing all of this modern version of Brainiac, what his motif is, what he's doing, what he's trying to do. The building blocks, again, which we see come back quite a few times across the series, maybe most famously in For the Man Who Has Everything, the Justice League Unlimited episode, where you really do establish that there is a longing in Superman to connect to his heritage, to his birth parents, and this world that he never got to know. And the betrayal that he feels when for a moment, he thinks maybe he's being given a chance to connect with that, when he thinks, Brainiac is this more benevolent force. And then the betrayal he feels when he realizes that he, not only is he not this benevolent force, but that he ultimately caused the downfall or helped cause the downfall of Krypton, and, could have saved lives and chose not to. And kind of the hurt that he feels in that moment when that kinship is seemingly kind of stripped away from him, I think is really good. So I think I maybe didn't appreciate that part of it when we reviewed it originally, is how this, in addition to establishing all these big plot points, like you mentioned, Nathan, the continuity going forward to future episodes of this show and Justice League and all that, but also to just establishing a little bit more of a baseline of who Superman is and what, his thoughts and feelings and wants in this universe, and this kind of longing he has to connect to Krypton that he can't really ever have, because you don't necessarily always think of Superman as a tragic character because he is so full of hope and optimism. But I think that lays that little bit of tragedy. I think it makes Superman more heroic because we know he has these things that he pines for that he can't have, but he still chooses to then, put on a brave face and to help people anyway. So I think it kind of gets at the core of what makes Superman, right? So I think I appreciate it a little bit more. So yeah, I might go a little bit higher. I might go an 8 or a 9 for mine if I were to rescore it. But yeah, I guess the 7 will have to do for now. Moving on to our next category, which will be visuals and animation. Once again, this episode was directed by Kurt Gaeta with animation by Coco and Dong Yang. A lot of cool designs. We get the Brainiac ship, the debut of this sort of robot personification of Brainiac. We get these looks at all these alien worlds that he visits when he touches the orbs. There's a lot of kind of unique stuff and character models and backgrounds and things that we don't get throughout really a lot of the other episodes of the series. We kind of take ourselves out of the normal confines of the city of Metropolis, and we get to see some really unique stuff. And so the character designers and people kind of got to flex their muscles a little bit.
What'd you like, Nathan? What stood out for you as far as, whether it's a certain sequence or, character design, or what visuals kind of were the highlights for you when you were watching this?
I think you mentioned a good point before with regards to they had everything in this episode. You had, like you said, you had the desert, you had a little bit of the city, you had, we had when Superman was in his spaceship, so we had the sky, the sky. So they had everything, and obviously, the introduction of the spaceship for the first time. Brainiac as a whole, all the different elements of Brainiac's ship. Even the Kryptonian, language as well that was written on the manuscript inside the ship. And like you said, when he touches the orb, the different planets and all the different... So they had a bit of everything. So it wasn't just a plain old simple episode where they just animated the one style throughout. So there's a lot of different things, which is really exciting. Nothing stood out to me that I could find any faults. I'm sure you guys will probably tell me different. But yeah, it was just good that they had a little bit of everything, and they were trying something different. And I like the fact, and I like the design of Brainiac. I like how you see him, you know who he is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really enjoyed what they tried to do for this episode, and I like how they had different versions of different things, and it was good.
They mentioned as far as the design of Brainiac. I don't think they mentioned it on this. It's funny, there is a commentary track for this on the DVDs and Blu-rays, but I think it's actually on a future episode on New Kids in Town, the Legion episode. They mentioned in the comics, generally purple and green are Brainiac's colors, and they kept the purple for this, obviously, but they went with kind of this very light bluish look and the silver. And they said one of the main reasons was it's Hulk colors to do purple and green, so they kind of wanted to differentiate there. And then I think they just said they thought the blue kind of just looked better with the silver and purple suit. But yeah, I love this Brainiac look. Some of the other notes on the commentary tracks, they did note, and it's funny that you mentioned that, Nathan, about I didn't really notice a lot. Kurt Gaeta, who directed this episode, kind of mentioned that he felt like what made this episode look as good as it did was the editing. They said a lot of the sequences they got were a little bit longer. Some of the fight scenes, especially at the end, were longer, and he said they just felt a little bit too slow and sluggish, which is obviously a real problem for a big action adventure superhero cartoon. So they said, they kind of clipped here, cut to this next shot a little quicker. And so I think editing is one of those things. I think we certainly on our show probably don't bring that up enough, because it's one of those things in TV and movies, kind of like with CGI or visual effects, people only talk about it when it's bad. You know what I mean? People will very quickly jump on if, there's a scene from this, whatever movie that just came out. Look how quickly they cut between shots. Look how terrible this is edited. But nobody talks about a movie that's
really well.
Editing is really great there.
Right. Again, it's just because I think most people don't look at or think about movies this way. So I thought that was kind of an interesting note that, because I do think when that final sequence where he's, where Brainiac's firing the laser down at him and he's kind of punching back, it's very indicative. I think there's a famous bit of one of the Max Fleischer Superman shorts where he's trying to push back against a laser beam like that.
Oh, yeah.
That definitely invoked there. And then the fight with Brainiac, there are kind of some quick cuts in those fight scenes that I think I noticed more after I heard them pointed out, for sure. I don't think I would have picked up on that because, I think overall, I think this is a pretty strong visual episode. They mentioned they felt like maybe they didn't get the scaling right for like how massive they wanted Brainiac's ship to feel, but I think they do a pretty good job with what the limitations would have been at the time. They didn't have the CG budgets where they could kind of, inflate vehicle sizes when they needed to after the fact. So they kind of had this painted design in the background with this Brainiac. But you get the feeling, I think at least, that it's a pretty massive.
It's massive, yeah.
Like it's like a city unto itself almost.
Yeah, I like. I will say, back to the Brainiac design. When he's doing the upload, his face panel sort of extends out, and if you look close enough, the face underneath of it sort of resembles the 80s like George Perez era design of that the android version that you would later see the floating head.
Yes.
And then he does get tentacles technically with the extension of the fingers. So you can kind of see the Easter eggs for that previous design in this, even though it's like under the skin or the visual that they went with for the actual design. I think the sequences that stood out for me on this watch, it's very creepy seeing him do the finger like tentacle extension. It is very like I don't know, it's sci-fi horror type thing. Like his face extends, his fingers extend. He's like doing this stuff, and then as Superman sort of interrupts him, and then he extends this beam, his fingers then go back to extending, like something you would see like a physical alien do that would kind of creep you out in a way, like you're watching one of the Alien movies or something like that. I don't know, where something extends out of it while it's also defeating the hero of your program. But I did enjoy that. I think when Superman's going through and touching the orbs, I think the jump through and maybe that goes to the editing. I think you said on the commentary track they mentioned that the 360 pan that they do on that final orb that he touches had to be reshot a couple of times, from what I understand. But I do think the editing in that, where he grabs one, you see this kind of terrifying scene of destruction happening. He drops it. He's kind of like taken aback. He grabs another one. You see even more destruction and more terror as he's standing there, people running around him. And the tension begins to rise as he's doing this. And then that last shot of him grabbing it, and the cover sort of, it reminded me, the stance that he had sort of reminded me of the Crisis on Infinite Earths cover, where he's kind of just standing there with his arms extended, just kind of like in disbelief of what is occurring. So, and not to mention the way that the camera sort of 360 pans around him as he's standing in the center of all of this mess. But I really did like that scene. I really liked the way that was edited. But as far as the rest of the episode is concerned, we mentioned the scene with him fighting the robots. You got to have, it's almost like a staple, Nathan, I feel like in Superman animation, but especially in the Superman the Animated Series. Superman, it's like contractually obligated to fight a couple of robots. And I think that sequence is pretty fun because it's not just one robot. All of a sudden, there's like a swarm of robots that comes out and attacks him.
No, exactly. And, we all know that Superman doesn't kill, but this is the one time when he can go above and beyond and do all of that. And it's just also seeing different versions of what Superman plans to do. Like, is he going to use his strength? Is he going to use his heat vision? Is he going to use his freeze breath? Is he, how is he going to take apart these robots? So, and I agree with what both of you were talking about with regards to all the different animation styles they used, and they just had a lot going on in this episode that you actually don't really look at until you look at it the way that we have. You don't actually appreciate it for what it is. So, but I really like the fact that they, there was so much going on that you don't actually, like I said, you don't take don't take it for granted, and you appreciate it for what you see, especially, like you said, so many years after the fact that it's happened, and it still stands up today.
Absolutely.
That's right.
One of the things, I mean, we sort of poo-pooed it a little bit just for the storytelling, but I do think that the dream sequence is pretty neat too. Liam and I kind of briefly touched on it before we got on with you, Nathan, but the fact that they didn't just reuse the animation from the first episode, from The Last Son of Krypton, where they reanimated the same sequences, but they kind of, you pulled the background of the scene out and you kind of put that trippy space stars, black sky and stars behind it to kind of give you the visual that this is happening while he's unconscious, and it's a trippy dream sequence that he's experiencing. But I thought that was pretty neat too, even though, again, not quite sure that it makes a ton of sense story-wise. They at least made it visually interesting, and they didn't go the lazy route of just, hey, let's just cut and paste, which you would have seen probably in a Super Friends or some of those older animation. If they dared to do something like that, they would have just cut, paste, copy, but they went in through it and reanimated it with this kind of variation to it to give it the dreamy feel to it. So I did like that also.
Yeah.
So our scores originally, back when we first touched on this, I gave visuals a 8 out of 10. Liam gave it a 6 out of 10.
Okay.
Where do you land, Nathan?
Wow. I'm actually, as we just discussed and everything that I just spoke about, I've actually given it a 10 out of 10.
Heck yeah. Let's go. Yeah.
Everything we've just spoken about, the fact that, there's so much that they put into this episode, and you spoke about it before, Liam, with regards to they've gone back and edited it and done it specifically for these, these reasons. And like you said, Cal, the dream sequence, they've thought about it. They haven't just copied and pasted from previous episodes, which we've seen so much in the past.
And just put a cloud border around the old footage and call it a day.
Yeah. So I loved it.
Yeah, 6 seems a little low. We talk about this a lot, and I think our first maybe 25, 30 episodes, we were really trying to because we kept thinking about well, if this episode scores this high, how are we going to differentiate it through? Because we had all these, milestone episodes we hadn't covered yet. That it was well, we can't say it's as good as this. So I think we were trying to. So sometimes I think I would just kind of arbitrarily pick a category.
You don't have to explain yourself. That's fine.
I'm just saying I don't know how I could have given this a 6. I just think based, like I said, even if the animation itself in space in places, even if like I said, the creators of the show said that they could tell it had to be edited down. Again, not something I necessarily picked up on, and I think those fight scenes, maybe that's the editing even helped it because it feels very kind of frenetic and punchy, like when he's fighting with Brainiac at the end there and getting tangled up. The way his body is contorted when he's in that handcuff tentacle thing is so unnatural and weird, and it's oh, that looks like you could tear him in half with this. And like you mentioned, Nathan, the idea of maybe this Superman not being as powerful as other versions of it, you feel he feels like he's in mortal danger in a lot of this episode, and you see the pain register in some of these fights that he's in. So, yeah, and again, just going back to the Brainiac ship design, all of the all the alien creatures, we just kind of get a brief glimpse of when he's touching the different orbs and the destruction of the planets and all that. Really, really impressive stuff. And then my one last visual note that we have to mention, one of those ones we have to mention, is that the truck that we see driving on the road right at the start has the grill of the original Batman the Animated Series Batmobile, which was an intentional little nod that they decided to throw on there. So the truck is the Batmobile. So we have to mention that, or it'll be in the comments.
That's right.
So yes, we.
So if you had to rescore it, would you?
Yeah, I think maybe I would go an 8 or a 9, maybe. Yeah. There's now I feel like I'm nitpicking, but I feel like there's some little bits where, when Superman comes down to tell Luthor that Brainiac's up to no good, he kind of stands in a really weird, awkward pose. I feel like that's where I feel like the scaling is. I feel like some of the camera angles and stuff they used were kind of made people look like they were shaped kind of weird. Superman looks super wide in some, and then very svelte in others. So, but again, maybe that's just me looking for things to nitpick to justify how low of a score I gave it. Because,
well, this episode also features a very slimmed down and pale-skinned Superman compared to the last Superman that we talked about in our last re-review, which was the TMS version, which is a much beefier, tanner Superman. Yes. So maybe Superman was on some sort of diet and hadn't seen the sun in a little while.
He was on Ozempic.
That's right. Something.
It was out in space, so
that's true. Yeah, that's true. There we go.
Hadn't eaten in a few weeks, maybe. But
headcanon. I like that.
All right, but that will move us on to our third category, which of course is the music by Michael McQuistion in this episode. So anything specific stand out to you in music on this week's episode, Nathan?
I was trying to go into depth and see if I can hear like a Brainiac theme, and whether they've used that throughout the series. Yeah. Like I know when we first introduction to Brainiac at the start, I thought, okay, is this what they're going to use? But they kind of just use that music probably too much throughout the episode. Like the background with the music and stuff like that is probably more overpowering than. But they do that in a lot of the episodes when they have like robots or alien spaceships and stuff like that. They have that background music that just. It's not irritating, but it's just continuation. Whether there's probably let's go more into the plot. Let's talk about more about something else.
Right.
You just hear that music, but there's nothing wrong with it. Don't get me wrong. The music at the Pentagon I thought was pretty cool. With especially when Lex uses that laser on the general and lifts him up and stuff like that.
Did Lex get to keep that? Do you think? By the way, did he hold on to that? Just like messes with like his secretary sometimes.
The anti-gravity machine.
I think he's patented it.
That's right. It's got to monetize
coming soon.
And the music during the dream sequence I thought was pretty well done. There wasn't much of the original Superman theme throughout the movie, throughout the episode that I could hear, which you normally hear that the hero sequence throughout the episode. But like I said, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't the best that I could have hoped for.
Yeah. As far as like the ongoing Brainiac, they give you that like that like the $6 million man to really date myself. Like that's way before my time or any of our times, but.
The warble,
it's that overlaid on top of, like you said, that kind of epic alien explosions are happening music that they did. So that is kind of what sticks in my head is like the Brainiac theme. It's really just more of like a sound effect or like a an echoed single note that you hit on like a keyboard or something like that. So. Like I said, nothing stood out as bad. I think, the only time I really remember the Superman theme coming in, I think, is there's the point where he kind of gets knocked into a wall, like through a wall, and you see some of like the circuitry inside the Brainiac ship, and then he kind of bursts out of it and comes flying back at Brainiac, and you get the Superman theme in there for a little bit. I didn't have a ton of other notes about music, though.
Yeah, the only thing, the as the ship descends at the beginning, there's that pretty epic. It's a sci-fi. This is strange encounter type of theme as the ship descends into the Metropolis desert. That's pretty fantastic as Jimmy's taking the pictures and stuff like that. Then even as Lex sort of ascends into the ship. But I think. Because this is so dialogue heavy, it's a lot of Superman going toe to toe with Brainiac. It's Superman talking with Lex. It's Superman sort of pondering and trying to understand what's going on in and around him. Like, they sort of laid off of the music. I think in the final sequence where the orbs are being destroyed, you would typically think you would hear some sort of loud, triumphant, like maybe even the Superman theme come in there, but you really don't. They really laid out and allowed the sort of sound of the explosions and the ship kind of crashing, and you kind of hear the missiles hitting the ship itself. And they kind of laid out on that last maybe quarter of the episode or so. And then you do get a little something as he places the orb on the little stanchion in the Fortress of Solitude. But there's not a lot about the music that was memorable. I will say the little bit that Brainiac and Superman have where he says where he punctuates it with "I am Krypton," like that one has the music there that kind of cuts out right when he says that, and I thought that punctuated it pretty well. But the music during the dream sequence was really the only thing that I've took similar to what Nathan was saying. Like it's trippy. It punctuates him kind of experiencing that, and when he touches the orb for the first time also. But so our original score is not great for music. So it sounds like we might be I might bump my original score up. So my original score was a 4 out of 10.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know. We usually like a baseline is usually 5 out of 10.
Yeah.
4 out of 10 would be like something was offensive and I didn't like it. But I would probably bump this up to a 5 because I think it's fine. And I wouldn't give it a negative. I don't think there's anything detrimental personally. You also gave it a 5 out of 10. I don't know if you would change yours or not.
Maybe up to a 6. The bit again where he's touching the orbs and he's sort of, bearing witness to all of this horror. I think the way the music kind of crescendos leading up to that big 360 shot where he's just looking at all of this destruction, I think is really good. So maybe for that sequence. But what about you, Nathan?
I was very similar to both of you. I scored it a 6 out of 10. Like I said, there was nothing that annoyed me or anything like that.
Right.
It was just one of those ones that nothing stood out, which was fantastic or exciting. I think it was actually let down because there's too much of it, to be honest, which is fun. But yeah, 6 out of 10 for me for that one.
Absolutely. And that will bring us to our fourth and final category, which of course is the voice acting. So we have a guest. Rather than going through each one individually, I'll kind of just read off the cast and then I'll throw it over to you, Nathan, in a moment here. Yep. But yes, we have some of our brief guest appearances. We hear Townsend Coleman. He's the voice of the programmer working with Lex. Also, a lot of voice acting credits on his resume there.
The Tick himself.
That's right.
The Tick animated series, most notably, probably.
We do briefly get to hear Christopher McDonald as Jor-El again, which is a lot of fun. We get Lauren Tom as Angela Chen, Victor Brandt as Professor Hamilton, and then of course our main players. We get very briefly. We get David Kaufman as Jimmy Olsen. We get Dana Delaney as Lois Lane, and also female general who asks a question about Brainiac in the Pentagon. And then of course our big three here. We have Clancy Brown as Lex Luthor, Corey Burton as Brainiac, plus 2 other guys, and then of course Tim Daly as Superman. As far as performances in this episode from our voice cast, Nathan, what stood out to you?
I think any episode that has Clancy Brown in it as Lex Luthor automatically lifts the scale up. Corey Burton is fantastic as Brainiac. Obviously, they do whatever they do to manipulate his voice, but I think. Just the way that they portray Brainiac in this series, I think is fantastic. Actually, I completely forgot about Lois and Jimmy being in this episode. They're only very short.
It's so brief.
Yeah. It's like, okay, all right, guys, come in for 10 minutes and then have the rest of the day off.
Right.
I still want to know how no one recognized famous reporter Lois Lane just wearing a hard hat. It's like Superman with glasses. The hard hat makes her unrecognizable.
But I know we're going back down to May, but it's funny how Jimmy loses his helmet when all the metal goes off, but Lois gets to keep her hard hat. Like it's
the wind bullied Jimmy specifically.
But overall, the voice acting I thought was done very well. Like I said, Clancy Brown as Lex Luthor is a standout in every episode that he does. Tim Daly, I think, does a very well interpretation of Superman in this episode. We see the rise of when he goes from being Superman to obviously being the powerful Superman. You can just see him with his way he portrays that voice when it gets deeper and sad. So no, I think the voice acting choices were done very well for this episode. Nothing was bad. I thought everything was really well done and really well played.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, yes. So this is our I guess if you're watching the series from the first episode, we've already heard Corey Burton as Brainiac, but it's the first time he's been something besides a computer screen with that logo on it. Yep. So giving him a form and matching that voice to it is
is really interesting. They mentioned on the commentary that they I think you might even mention this earlier, Nathan. Outer Limits, specifically the original TV show, and they based it on the actor Vic Perrin, who was the voice of the Control on that show, one of the computer AI things on that show. That was mentioned. Bruce Timm kind of gave him that note in the recording session, and Corey, being the pros pro that he is, just immediately went, "Oh, of course I can do a Vic Perrin." Just let's start rolling, and then he just creates one of the most iconic voice performances, I think, in the whole series here. You mentioned this, I think, right up top here, but I love having Lex involved in this story, and how at the start, at least, how sort of in control he feels. And it feels like, well, Lex is really the one that's really making out like a bandit and all of this. And then you juxtapose that with at the end when he realizes he's been a little bit gullible and has kind of allowed Brainiac to waltz right in the front door and potentially doom the whole planet. And it's just like that bit of that bit of like crow he has to eat there to accept that. But I love and the parting line of I've had my fill of aliens for the day, as he sort of walks away. Like, he's so mad that he got in this episode. And I think Clancy Brown's great. And then Tim Daly, it's funny. So obviously now, Nathan, I know you're going through My Adventures with Superman. You have Jack Quaid playing Superman in that show. He's a very young, sort of energetic, kind of a little bit more awkward Superman, but very high energy in that show, which matches the tone of that show. Yeah. We were talking about this, I think, recently when we did our previous re-review. I feel like Tim Daly's Superman, I appreciate more now. He has this real sort of stoicism to him, which I think people could mistake for like monotone or like uninterested. But I feel like when you get to an episode like this, where he is presented, like we already talked about in plot, with having this connection he thought he could never have with his homeworld and his father and all of this, you hear the betrayal and the kind of the anger in his voice. I feel like these types of episodes are where Tim Daly's Superman really gets to shine, because he sort of breaks out of that stoicism a little bit more and gets to really kind of like stretch his legs, flex his muscles, whatever you want to say.
Yeah, exactly. And to me, Tim Daly's still my favorite animation voice actor with Amanda Steele. I still love the fact to this day that, he still loves the character. He still, I know that George Newbern goes off and does Comic-Con. I just saw something on Twitter or X recently that they're doing a Comic-Con all together, but I still think Tim Daly's my favorite voice actor with regards to Superman. He started off slow throughout the series, but I think he definitely amped it up as he went on. And definitely in this episode, you could see that.
Yeah, I think to that point, that's what when I think of Tim Daly's Superman, that's what I usually think of, is like those early episodes. He was kind of finding what the voice of Superman would be. How do you portray the difference between Clark and Superman, or as he's portraying both of these characters, like, is there a differentiation between the two of them? But you do get the glimpses. We talked about this when we re-reviewed a little piece of Home a couple weeks ago, where you have certain sequences that kind of show you, even as he's establishing and kind of finding his footing with this, you can see what Andrea Romano saw likely as like, okay, this is why we see him as our Superman, and why in some of the later episodes, you already mentioned Apocalypse Now, like where you have this emotional storyline where he really has to emote this. And I think that is shown here in this episode, like you referred to, Nathan, where Superman gets to kind of show his frustration and being upset and feeling betrayed and feeling as if he's distraught over the fact that these innocent lives were wiped away by evil, which is the heart of Superman, right? He's the defender of truth and justice, right? So he's that is perfectly encapsulated in that sequence where Tim Daly gets to express that to Brainiac, where he's like, you murdered them, you killed all of them. Why? Like, he's and that also feels authentically Superman, in that he can't fathom the idea that someone could be that evil to wipe out an entire an entire race of aliens, for what reason could you possibly have to be that evil? His brain just doesn't work like that, which is so Superman, and Tim Daly perfectly captures it, I feel like, in that sequence.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's, like I said, I think in some of these other episodes, which are a little less serious or directly build on these character beats, when he's fighting the Parasite or Livewire, having him be a little bit more reserved and a little bit more stoic, I think works, because then you see these moments where he is taking it personally, where you see where he has this sort of very calm baseline demeanor that we see across a lot of, especially the early episodes, like you both said. And then you get to see him sort of break out into these more angry and distraught moments here. And I think it makes those episodes really stand out for me. So this would definitely be one of them. And I think Cal will be about ready to hit us with our scores from our original review, and then we'll get Nathan's in just a moment here.
Yeah. So I think our original scores, I gave voice acting a 7. You gave it a 6. I think while we're sitting here appreciating those particular sequences, I think looking back, maybe thinking as overall for the episode, me again justifying our scores, perhaps because the flashes of greatness from Tim Daly are just in a couple of the sequences, and he does have a lot of dialogue in the episode.
Sure.
Maybe that affected the score there. I think looking back, Corey Burton, that sequence where he first introduces it and he delivers that line and he says, "I am Krypton." Like, that is, like, you could put that on a reel of great Corey Burton lines throughout all of his work, like in all animation. It stands alone. Like, it's so good. Corey Burton's great. We love him. Obviously Clancy Brown, incredible also. And I think looking at the nuances there, I'd probably give it an 8 if I had to redo it, but obviously sticking with my 7.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Gosh, I think I can't believe I gave this a 6. Like, I have to repeat myself here, but no, I think I'd be in like the 8, 9, maybe even 10 category, just because of this being such an important episode. And as Nathan already talked about, how good Clancy Brown and Corey Burton alone are.
Yeah.
And then, like we said, adding in that more, the Tim Daly getting to break out of his sort of stoicism in this episode a little bit more. I think I'd be a little bit higher if I were rescoring it, which we're not. So the only score that really matters here today is Nathan. So Nathan, what did you have for voice acting?
Straight up in the bat, 10 out of 10 for me. Like I said, Clancy Brown lifts this episode so much. I love his voice acting of Lex Luthor. It is amazing. Corey Burton as Brainiac, and like I said, the fact that Tim Daly, did such a great voice over of Superman throughout about this episode, and this is actually probably the start of how we developed that character a lot better.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think the fact that it was basically those 3 main characters that were predominantly throughout this episode. We saw obviously snippets of Lois and Jimmy and generals and all that sort of stuff throughout, but the fact that it was mainly based off these 3, I think that's what elevated it so much. And I can't fault it.
There we go.
Yeah, totally agree. I love that as a 10. It's just so iconic to have those 3. Like, again, you just think about like how spoiled we were on these shows. Once in a while, it just hits you when you get all of them in one episode like this, like you said, Nathan, having all 3 of them together, again, with Dana Delaney and some of the other great iconic actors who worked on this episode in this series. Like, it's wow.
Yeah.
Well, and again, such a credit to Andrea Romano as the voice and casting director to know that these people could make magic together, and to the actors themselves. So
that's right.
I believe that will bring us to our final scores. And, we have our original final scores. I think Cal has tallied up Nathan's final score as well.
Yeah, the only score that matters is Nathan's 34 out of 40 here, which is good. Just shy of what would be a top pick, but still, I mean, that's a relatively impressive score, I would say. far exceeding what our original scores were here. But this is one of the other things we've added since we've done that initial review, Nathan, and that's talking about rewatchability. And that comes down to the importance of the show itself, like this episode for the show itself. Would you put this on if you're recommending a couple of Superman episodes to a friend, like, hey, which episode should I watch? Like, is this what core one that you would say, yeah, you gotta watch this episode? For me, I'd say yes, not only for the entire DCAU. This introduces a bad guy that comes back again and again and again and again and plays a core part of what is heralded as the greatest story in the history of the DC animated universe with the Cadmus Project. Spoiler alert. So I'd say, yeah, this gets 2 thumbs up from me as far as rewatchability. Nathan, what about you?
Yeah, same, 2 thumbs up. If I had a third one, I'd throw that in there as well. I think, like you said, is if you're going to watch the rest of the series, you need to watch this episode. Yes, I know we kind of get the origin story of Brainiac through the Last Son of Krypton, part 1. But still, the physical being of Brainiac, and we'll find out more about him throughout the series. But yeah, I think it's a definite, you have to see this, especially the first introduction between Superman and Brainiac. And again, Superman finding a bit more about, where he's from, finding a bit more about Krypton, and any time, and you mentioned it before, any time he can get the opportunity to find out more about his people or about more about where he come from, he'll almost lose himself just so he can find that out.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely rewatchability for me. Absolutely.
And then one other note I wanted to make, because I saw this on the wonderful DCAU wiki page, is that Lex mentions that one of the things Brainiac could offer humanity is a cure for cancer. And later on in Justice League Unlimited, Brainiac does in fact cure Lex's cancer with nanotechnology.
Wow! I did not even catch that one.
Yeah, that's actually a good bit of trivia for the DCAU wiki there. Credit to them. But no, yeah, I think this episode is it's so seminal. Every additional appearance of Brainiac in this show is based on this episode, from Ghost in the Machine to Nighttime, which Cal and I actually got to guest on your show and talk about that episode a couple years ago. I think that's still up there on your feed. But yeah, it's that episode about how he gets into Lex's computers and also into Bruce Wayne, the Wayne Tech computers from there. And then again, Brainiac comes back, and not only in Justice League, he's part of a 2-part episode in Static Shock as well. So it's just, is one of the seminal, not just Superman villains, but DCAU villains, I think, as a whole, that, and this is kind of where you really get the building blocks for every subsequent appearance he has in the whole rest of the series and beyond. So yeah, this is definitely a must watch. And we were so delighted to have Nathan on to talk about it with us today. Before we say goodbye, of course, though, we want to give Nathan some time here to talk about your show. As mentioned, Superman, the animated podcast, just recently relaunched after a little bit of a hiatus. So just once again, chat with the people for a minute, tell them what you'll be talking about, and also where you can find the show and your socials and all that.
First of all, thanks so much for having me back on the podcast. It's so great to see you both again.
Absolutely.
And, talk about Superman and animation. I absolutely love it. Like I said, a bit on hiatus for a couple of years, but I'm so great to be talking about my adventures with Superman. The good thing is, I think, about this series is you don't hear many people talking about it, and even for the people that I have spoken to about it, like the one thing about it, there's nothing out there. Like there's no figurines, there's no action figures, there's no clothing line, there's nothing. And
it's a shame.
And the fact that I get to talk about it with some great people, and off mic, we'll talk about it to yourselves if you come on the podcast later on.
Spoiler alert.
But yeah, if you definitely want to find the podcast, we're on your favorite podcast apps, Superman the Animated Podcast, or you can find us on social media on X or Instagram at Sup Animated Pod, or you can on Facebook, Superman the Animated Podcast, or you can send us an email at supanimатedpod@gmail.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for joining us, Nathan. As mentioned, we will hopefully be returning the favor and heading over to your podcast feed pretty soon to talk about an episode or two of My Adventures with Superman down the line. Excited to have you back. And hey, we've talked about this. We're pretty much out of original Superman episodes to talk about at this point. I think as mentioned, we co-reviewed this episode with another Brainiac episode. So maybe if we get to a re-review of Ghost in the Machine, I think you might become our official Brainiac correspondent going forward. If you're willing to accept that role in our show, I think we could probably have you back on to talk about another Brainiac adventure sometime down as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm all in.
All right. Well, thank you so much to Nathan for joining us. And without further ado, I'm going to throw it back to ourselves sometime in the future to close out the episode.
Thanks, us from the past. Wow. We already said it on the episode, I'm sure, Cal. But yes, that was a blast having Nathan back. So glad that you can hear his show, Superman the Animated Podcast, once again as he begins to tackle a new show. And yes, we definitely hope to be able to join him on one of his episodes, not too far down the line as well. But for today, we want to just thank everyone who did listen, whether you do so on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or perhaps the aforementioned youtube.com/thepodtower. Wherever you listen to us, a great free way to support the podcast would be to subscribe to us and like or give 5 stars, whatever the affirmation button is on your particular app of choice. We would appreciate you doing that for us. And if you leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, in addition to giving us 5 stars, we will read those out on the show and even send you a little gift as a little thanks for that. And as far as other ways to support the podcast more directly, we do have a donate button that's in the show notes below in the description there, where you can become a monthly subscriber to our show. We have a few people who do donate monthly, and we greatly appreciate that. And yet another way you could support us, of course, is to head to our merch store, which is also down in the show notes there. And you can pick yourself up a shirt or a mug or a hat. Those are all great ways to support us. And another way to support us, of course, is to come back next week when we wrap up this latest stint in Metropolis. But it seems like there's a little crack in the universe, and we might be slipping into another dimension and once again floating around the multiverse next week, Cal?
That's right, Liam. And interestingly enough, we talked a little bit about it when we spoke with our special guest correspondent, Nathan, but he is actually going through and reviewing the latest animated incarnation of the Man of Steel. And what better way to wrap up our celebration of the 86th birthday of the Man of Tomorrow with a look at that brand new show, which is, of course, is called My Adventures with Superman. So we're going to be taking a look at season 1, episode 1, kicking it off. Why not? We got to do that with the pilot. I think we've done that with most shows that we've introduced ourselves to before we start, heading deep into the catalog. So we start where it starts, and that's with the episode Adventures of a Normal Man. So as Nathan mentioned, not a lot of media coverage, or that's not to say I think Twitter/X, you have your pockets of people that are very much in favor of this show, and then you have some equally passionate fans who are not as thrilled about this version of the show. So excited to see which camp we'll land on. I know you've seen all of this already, as you mentioned in our interview with Nathan. My first time looking at it, so excited to chat about where you land as far as your super fandom with this show, and where I might land on that spectrum of loving it or hating it. So hopefully loving it or somewhere in the middle, because don't like to spend my energy hating things.
We don't use the H word a lot on this show, generally because we try to watch things that we think we'll like for the most part, I think. But
we reserve
yes, Cal,
for unity and maybe the occasional dollar in the bad episode.
That's right. There's always a few exceptions to the rule, but yes, in general, we are looking forward to looking at that My Adventures with Superman pilot episode next week on the show. But until then, I'm Liam.
And I'm Cal.
And we'll talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU Review.
Bye-bye.